Good morning. My name's Mike Bauer. I am a master Subaru technician. Today we're working on a '99 Subaru Forester. This car came in, customer self-diagnosed it, says it had a timing belt failure. Partially disassembled. Just the front of the motor's been a little disassembled on it. Came in on a hook, so well, they want a new motor put in it. They just want a motor changed out in it. So we're going to take a look at what we got and pull a motor out and swap another good used motor in there that's already had the head gaskets all replaced and everything in it, and timing components all replaced, and we're going to do the swap today and have it running down the road sometime this afternoon. I think they've already had the radiator fans out of it already because they're unplugged.
They're already, they were never plugged back in.
The electrical connections were unplugged and not plugged back in.
Yeah,
so.
well those would have had to have come off, wouldn't they, to work on the timing components?
To get at it, they probably they either had the radiator out of it or they had these shrouds off it already, so I'm not really sure. So we're just going to take the, I always leave the radiator in it. I can access the motor real good with the radiator in it not hurting it. So
so it's just what, 2 bolts on each one of those fans? That's all there is?
Yep, and then they just lift right out.
They just lift out, assuming you've unplugged them.
Right. Yeah, they've already been unplugged, so.
Okay. They're not really fastened to anything at the bottom. They just kind of sit into a groove, or they've got like a little dowel or something that fits in a hole.
Yeah, there's a little alignment pin on the bottom of them. The passenger side one's a little bit more of a struggle. I'm going to go ahead and take the air intake system off it next. That's going to take a 12 millimeter. I'm going to unplug the mass airflow sensor first. And '99 was the only was the last year the Forester with a mass airflow. In 2000 they went to a MAP sensor and they no longer utilize this the mass airflow. Take a screwdriver and disconnect it at the throttle body. And then I'm going to take the 12 millimeter and just unbolt it from the bracket here. We have to have this whole thing done in 4 hours, so I've got to get moving. Think we can do it, Carrie?
I think you can do it.
Yeah, but I have a, oops. I have somebody here giving me moral support. That might just speed the process up a bit. Okay, we've got a couple of breather lines going to the valve covers. There's one on top of each valve cover in the center. There's one, and come over here and get the other one off. Right smack dead center of the valve cover, there's a breather.
Well, it took some muscle, huh?
Yeah, thank God I had Wheaties for breakfast. I've looked at the parts that came with the car and all the pulleys seem to be intact. I don't see a timing belt back there. They said they had bought a new one and put it on and tried to start the car and realized that it wasn't going to start and it probably had bent valves. But usually when I see a car with a failed timing belt, one of the pulleys has failed on it. Usually the cogged pulley. I'm going to show you what that looks like. This is the pulley that's on that bolts to the water pump, and this is timing belt driven, and sometimes these will fail. The bearing dries out in it, lubrication goes away, and because there's a lot of side tension on it, the belt kind of goes around it like this. There's a lot of side tension on it, so it's usually the first one to fail. Probably 80 to 100,000 mile life expectancy out of this pulley. So if you're not doing your timing belt every 80,000 miles, you could see this fail. If this fails, catastrophic damage, bent valves, usually doesn't destroy the pistons or anything, but it entails pulling the engine out, taking the heads apart, replacing bent valves, and such. So okay, we're going to take the accessories off the front of the engine now. We're going to take a 12 millimeter deep well. A lot of this has been loosened up already because, like I say, they've already taken some of the stuff off. But this is the alternator bolt. It's a big long bolt with a retention clip on the back side.
Now, don't you want to disconnect the battery before you start playing with the alternator?
You know, Carrie, that's a good idea. You know what? Sometimes I get a little bit ahead of myself, but I'm going to do that on your request.
Just take off that negative. You're going to take off the positive too while you're at it, huh?
Yeah, I might as well pull the battery right out and I'd take it out of the car anyway, so I'll just disconnect it and take it right out and get it out of my way. Set that
The
off.
battery tray you just pulled out.
Yep, I'm just
Okay.
going to set it off to the side.
And keep that for later.
Yep, we'll put it back in eventually. Okay. Keep in mind it is Sunday morning, and it's always good to have a second pair of eyes. These parts I just throw in a box till we need them later. Again, everything on a Subaru is either 10, 12, 14, or 17 millimeter. Sometimes people will change the alternator and they'll use the nut that's provided with the rebuilt alternator, and it'll be a 13 millimeter. And I toss them. I throw them right in the garbage can, and I grab a 12 millimeter because I just don't like having to grab
One socket for one nut and
so-
the whole engine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I
Crazy.
prefer the way Subaru does it. They're very uniform in what they do. So.
And you're just putting that back on, so you,
Yep, just so I don't lose it.
Yeah.
Sometimes these can be a little stubborn getting these out. Somebody over tightens this bolt right here, and they bring that. There's a sliding sleeve in the alternator that really binds it up if you really crank this tight. And some people think things have to be, you know, everything's got to be 100 foot-pounds, but that's not the case. Over tightening them is not good. Let me unplug the, there. I'm going to unplug the, just push the detent down right here, and we're going to unplug the alternator plug. Get that out of the way. I'm going to unhook the clasp for the harness, and then unplug the two alternator wires. A couple of detents on them. Most only have one wire here, but they started changing that all in 2000, 99, 2000. They make these a little bit harder to get off. There we go. I'm going to pull this harness right out. Goes underneath the low side AC hose, and we just pull that out of the way. Get that right out. Okay, now we can go back and struggle with the alternator some more. We got the bolt out. Now I got to pull on it. Sometimes a bit of a struggle. Don't want to pry too much up on this. Real lightly, because you'll break these, and you don't want to break anything you don't have to break. It's still going to be a struggle. It's going to fight me all the way. Finally.
You win.
I win. So 1 out of 20 will be that much of a struggle. Usually they're not that hard to get off, the alternators. Okay, now we're going to take the power steering off. There's a couple of 10mm bolts right here on the intake that support the lines, the fluid lines. Take those off first. Okay, we have a 12mm on a long extension. We're going to take the back one first. Sometimes you have to use a swivel because they're the intake comes farther forward. On some intake, every intake's a little different. It's for some reason Subaru made a whole bunch of different intakes. The California version is different than the federal emission standard. And there's 2 bolts up front we're going to take off. Throw those in the box. And then there's one on the lower. It's on the lower left corner of the power steering bracket. Kind of hard to see. It's probably, if I were I'd say it's at about 6:30 if you on a clock, right underneath the pulley. We're going to unplug the harness off of the firewall here. There's a couple of relays we're just going to unplug. They stay with the intake when we pull the intake off. So we're going to unplug those 2 right now. Some of these detents are a real bugger. They like to fight with you. Sometimes they come off easy, sometimes they don't. This one's fighting with me. And then there's a vacuum line here too that stays with the intake. They'll stay with the intake. Now I can take this. Oh, there is a electrical connection on the 99 up power steering.
Let me see where you're at. Where's it at?
It's right here. 99 up has a pressure monitor for the AC. And we're going to take not the AC, but the power steering. We're just going to set it up there off to the side. Basically now we're at the point where we're going to disconnect everything to the intake manifold and get that out of the way. We're going to take the intake manifold right off the car, and we'll start by unplugging all the spark plug wires. There's 2 on each side of the motor. We'll take all 4 out. One of them's already halfway out. We got all 4 spark plug wires out. This car has a vacuum. It's monitoring the vacuum on a gauge on the dash, which is not factory, but you know, it's just a T here that's hooking it up. So we're going to disconnect that and get that out of the way. And we're going to set that over to the side. This is not factory, by the way. And that's where it would normally set. We're just going to put it where it belongs for the time being. Here's another Forester without cruise control. This is the second one in a row. That's really uncommon. Don't see a lot without cruise. So it's only got one. It's only got one throttle cable. If it had cruise, it would have a second one next to it, and the cruise control unit would be mounted back here on the passenger side, back side of the firewall. So yeah, we just 2 in a row.
So you're removing the throttle cable now?
Taking the throttle cable off right now. Yeah, we're going to take everything off that attaches the intake manifold to the engine. There is a little tab on the back side here that prevents the throttle cable from coming off if the throttle body becomes if it becomes jammed. So you have to get it off from around this little tab on the back side. If you see that tab there, goes up underneath it. Sometimes they're bent in so the cable can't come off. We're just gonna put that cable off to the side. Grab the pliers. We're gonna disconnect the
Where you at?
power brake booster line right here. Those usually come off fairly easy. Never a struggle to get those off. We'll get that out of the way. Right back here we have the knock sensor connection. It's a white plug. We're gonna unplug that too, because that stays with the intake. If you don't unplug it, you'll pull one of these ends off and then you have to reattach the end. There's two connections up front. There's the crankshaft position sensor that has to be disconnected, and then the oil pressure switch comes off. And then back over on the driver's side up front, we have the camshaft position sensor, which is a plug right here. On the back side right here, there's a detent. We're just going to push it in and lift it off. Okay, now we have a water line that goes to the bottom of the throttle body, and that water line needs to be removed at this point. Maybe you can see it through here. You see it right there, Carrie? It's below the linkage and inward a little bit.
Okay.
It's got a spring clamp on it, and you just take a pliers and you spring clamp. You squeeze it and push it downward. Take the pliers and put it on the hose and just kind of wiggle a little side to side to loosen it up. And then you just take a screwdriver or a pry bar, you put it on top of the hose and just give it a little tap and it'll pop right off. Now you've got that one water hose off. There's one more water hose that we're going to have to address yet, but we'll get to that in a second. We're at the point now where we can take the three fuel lines off. Somebody's replaced this fuel. It's even loose. Somebody's replaced this fuel line once before with non-fuel injection hose. It's not a high enough pressure, so we'll put a new hose on when we put this all back together. This hose is
gas running out of it.
Yeah, this hose is non-compliant for this application, so we're just going to take this hose right off of it and switch and put a new piece of hose in there when we put it back together. I'm just going to throw this in the box for now, and then eventually that hose would start leaking and cause a fire hazard. It may already be leaking. Maybe that's why it's sitting here today. And there are a lot of people that get underneath the hood of a car and they do stuff like that. They put that type of fuel line on, they're not knowing. And a fuel line is a pretty critical part of the system. If the fuel line starts leaking, all hell can break loose.
Fuel's flammable, isn't it?
Sure is. Gasoline's very flammable.
Where are the three fuel lines?
The bottom one is just a breather. The second one, the middle one, is a return. It's a pressure return line back to the tank, and the top one is the fuel delivery line. This is the pressure line. This is a high pressure line, 40 psi minimum. So that hose that was on here was only rated to probably 15 or 20 psi.
Well, they better be glad it wasn't direct fuel injection then.
Well, I just don't understand why
those are like 300 psi or some crazy number, aren't they?
Yeah.
Then they'd really be in trouble.
I don't know why people do that stuff, but somebody got their fingers on there that didn't understand.
Just a hose. Just replace it with another hose. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. I've seen people put vacuum line in place of fuel line, and it just doesn't last very long. Vacuum line doesn't last very long, and it's not reinforced line, so it's, you know, the life expectancy is almost nil.
Well, it's just fuel.
It's just fuel.
It's right over there by your exhaust manifold where it gets really, really hot and could ignite it.
Yeah,
Just
really,
spend 30 cents instead of 60 cents.
It can theoretically run right down the side of the motor onto the exhaust too. So
Sure, I'm looking at it right there. I can see that.
So we've got a few more things we're going to disconnect, and we'll be able to take the intake off. We're going to disconnect the fuel injection harness connectors, and there's two big connectors back here. There's a gray one and a brown one. They have a detent on the back side. We're just going to push on the detent and then kind of give it a little tug. It pulls right out. Do the same on the brown one. They come out fairly simple. This connector doesn't have to be connected, but I'm going to just disconnect it to get it out of my way.
Which connector is that?
A third gray one. And then I'm going to release this this clip on the bracket here. There's a clip here that holds this onto a bracket. I'm going to release that just to get it out of my way. There's just a couple of little detents on a don't want to be real stubborn. There we go. Now that harness is up out of my way. Okay. We have two bolts on the back here that hold this bracket. These are the two plugs for the fuel injection harness on the intake, and this stays with the intake, and this bracket that also stays with the intake. So when we lift the intake off, this bracket goes with it. So we have to unbolt this from the engine. One you have to do with a box end wrench, and it's right below the throttle body. Kind of hard to see, but they started doing this in about '99. They added the second bolt. Anything earlier didn't have the second bolt. It's just underneath the throttle body. And then the second bolt is right here by the engine lift hook. And we're going to take that one out. Now we're going to disconnect the PCV hose. This stand pipe right here stays on the engine, and this is the PCV hose. The PCV valve's right here on the back side of the intake. So we need to take that hose off. Every once in a while I forget to disconnect it, and it holds the intake on. You just can't lift it off with that on there. So, and then we have a ground wire back on the back side of the head right here. We're just going to push that in and pull it off. Pretty much we're ready to take the 8 mounting bolts for the intake out now, and there's four on each side of the runners. And you can see where my ratchet is placed. We're going to spin them all out. Using my speed ratchet. I'm going to grab my magnet quick. So I've got I got the 4 intake bolts all loose, and we're going to pull them out with a magnet, just so we don't lose them. They're along the runner. Can you see it? Can you see where they are, Carrie?
Yeah.
Got the magnet on one of them. Just pulled it out, and then in between the 2 runners, we have 2 more. And then on the back side of the runner, we have 1 more. 4 bolts. We got 4 more on the other side, exactly the same thing to do. So we're gonna come over here and we're gonna wheel these 4 out. Got our focus there, Carrie?
Yep.
Okay. If you look at this timing cover, Carrie, while we're right here in the front of the motor, can you see where that insert broke out?
Oh yeah.
That's what I was talking about in one of the previous videos. Sometimes these inserts will break off. They'll break when you take these covers loose. I recommend you go into Subaru and spend the $20 and buying a new one instead of just bolting the timing cover on with 1 or 2 bolts. I always replace them if they break, and it's common that they do break. There's 3 brass inserts in this timing cover. Now this will have to be thrown away and replaced with a new one, and they're about 20 bucks at Subaru. So this cover's junk. Lots of people will put the bolt back in there and put a nut on the back side. The middle 2 are kind of hard to see down here between the runner. We good, Carrie? You want me to start spinning them out?
Yeah, go ahead.
They're kind of hard to see, especially with a camera right there, but they're right smack dab between the 2 runners. You can't miss them. A long extension works the best to get at them.
What's a runner?
These are the runners. These are the fuel runners. The intake manifold fuel runners.
Okay.
I know, you were thinking about some hot girl with a nice little outfit running down the street.
I was thinking about somebody who didn't pay you for the job.
Your mind's in the gutter, Carrie. We got 4 more bolts. We're pretty much ready to lift the intake off now. We've got a couple of hidden things underneath the intake. One of them is a fuel line, or not a fuel line, but a water line, and the other one is the coolant sensor for the computer. And both of them are connected to this aluminum crossover tube here. Okay, so I'm going to squeeze that clamp, and I'm going to try to push it back out of the way. Sometimes you got to work it a little bit. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab a 2x4, and I'm going to put a short 2x4 underneath my intake manifold to hold it up out of the way. See how I did that? That way I can get both hands in there. Now I'm going to just take my finger and I'm going to guide that clamp back out of the way. Sometimes they're a little bit stubborn. There, got that out of the way. Just going to put the screwdriver on the very front of the line. If I can get to it, there it is. Not going to be easy. There, I got it started. This is one of the hardest things you'll have to do on the whole job, so bear with me. Okay, I got it pulled off of there. And then there's a little detent on this right here on the side of the plug. There's a detent you have to push on before you can unplug it from this sensor.
Where was that plugged in?
Right here. It's plugged in right here. Okay, I'm going to push the detent and just pull it out.
Okay.
Now the intake manifold, unless I forgot something, everything should lift right off. Intake manifold comes right off the car. Just gonna set it up here for now. We're not gonna throw it away just because it's on the garbage can. We're halfway done pulling the motor out at this point. How long did that take us? 35 minutes, 30 minutes? We're just gonna lift off these old manifold gaskets and we're gonna throw them away, discard them. Just throw them in the garbage. Got just a few more things up on top to disconnect. This This person has added a mechanical line for the fuel or for the oil pressure.
Right?
Yep. And there's a nice little port back here that accommodates an oil pressure line real nicely. It's 10 millimeter. I just took it off. Put that line off to the side. Hopefully we'll remember that it goes back on. Right here there's a plastic access plug. You just got to pull on it and it lifts right off. This is the engine flywheel, and there's 4 torque converter bolts inside there. We're going to remove them all right now. The person who took the engine apart had already taken the balancer off and put the retention bolt for the harmonic balancer back into the end of the crank. We're taking a 1/2-inch drive ratchet with a 22 millimeter socket, putting my ratchet on it, and I'm going to use that to turn the engine over so I can access the torque converter bolts. I've got one showing here already, so I'm going to put my deep well socket on it. Actually, this is in the way. This is going to be a little bit of a problem for me, so I'm going to remove this. It has to come off anyway and go onto the other engine, so I'm going to take this little port out right now. 1/2 inch. I don't want to break it, so I'm just going to take it out, set it aside. What they've done here is they've taken out just a plug back here, and they put an oil pressure adapter. If you look at the oil pressure switch, it has an adapter that screws into the block. And what they did is they just got another one of those adapters and took the plug out and screwed that in the back of the block to access the oil galley. Follow me, Carrie, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Normally, if you look right here, that's just an oil galley plug. They took that plug out and put an oil pressure.
There's a plug in there right now. It just looks like a hole in the engine block from the camo spooler.
It's a plug. It's got an Allen.
So you got to use an Allen wrench, and that unscrews.
Exactly. And we're going to take that out and replace. We're going to take this out and replace it with the other one.
Sure. So that their oil pressure gauge will work. Exactly.
So now we're going to get back here and we're going to start taking these torque converter bolts out. You know, they come out real easy. Just turn the motor over till you see the next one. We just let the torque converter spin until the socket hits the block. We just give it a little tap. We can actually turn the motor a little bit then so we can get at the screw easier. The bolt, it's not a screw. Here's our fourth one. That one's kind of gnarled up. We'll replace that one. She had a transmission put in this car just about a year ago. She said the transmission went bad in it, and I can see somebody kind of gnarled up the threads on it. So I'm just going to throw it in the garbage and we'll replace it with a new one. What we're going to do now is we're going to remove the aluminum crossover. But before we do that, we have to take the heater hose lines off the two supply lines for the heater core. The factory clamps are an 8mm or a Phillips screwdriver head. In this climate, they're usually real easy to get off. In a northern climate, they can get pretty rusty, so sometimes you just have to break them to get them off. These unscrew fairly simple in this climate. So I just take that off and just put my pliers on here and just kind of wiggle a little bit. This one was leaking, you can see all the crustacean there. We'll make sure it doesn't leak when we put it back together, though. Hopefully they didn't run water in this engine, because that's what happens here in Arizona. People don't understand the importance of antifreeze / coolant. Antifreeze has anti-corrosive properties to it. Without antifreeze in an engine, everything gets corroded really, really badly. I've had engines where I pull out that you just have to throw them away. There's so much corrosion in the blocks. And just water doesn't do it. It'll destroy a mechanical seal and a water pump in no time at all. It's not just about keeping the engine from freezing. coolant is very important. 50-50 mixture. Okay, now we're gonna take off this aluminum crossover. That one was tight.
What are those bolts? Oh, you just keep the bolts in there?
Yeah, just leave the bolts in there, and then there's a rubber O-ring underneath here that seals it. We'll dig the O-rings out and replace them and clean the corrosion out of the block before we reuse this engine block. Yeah, we'll just set this off to the side.
What about the other heater hose?
We're going to take that off right now too. If we're gentle with these and we don't lose the pieces, we can put a little WD-40 on them and reuse these clamps. They're the best clamps. Now we just take these hoses and put them off to the side. We're going to pull a starter off right now. There's a bolt that's right down underneath it. It's a stud coming out of the transmission with a nut on it. We're going to put a 14 millimeter wrench on it. The early engines used a 19 millimeter, and then in the later ones they went to a 14, and they're usually really tight. And this one was. But once you get it loose, it usually spins off real free because it's a stud. Well, in Wisconsin or Minnesota or New York, it might not come off so easy, because we know how rusty things get there. There's usually a washer behind it, but this has been off before and they didn't replace the washer. I'm going to disconnect the electrical connections to the starter. It's a 12 millimeter on the back side of the solenoid right here. I'm going to put a 12 millimeter box end wrench on it, loosen it up. Sometimes these are replaced with 13 millimeter nuts too, because people put a replacement starter in, and for some reason the remanufacturing companies like to put 13s on. Just put that little nut back on there so I don't lose it. Also on the starter there is a signal wire that engages the starter when you turn the key, and that's a small wire. It's got a little detent on it. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a bugger to get off of there. We're going to pinch it. Oh, that one I got off. There's a little detent on it right here that you have to push right here, right there, and to get it off. It's kind of a bugger sometimes, but don't give up. This bolt on the back side also holds the ground cable on. It's a 14 millimeter. It's the upper bell housing bolt. Got the starter out. Okay, that's the second bell housing bolt on the driver's side we're going to take out. Like I say, the upper starter bolt was also a bell housing bolt. Some people leave the starter hanging in there. They'll just unbolt it and leave the wires connected to it, and to me that's just in the way. It's about a 4-inch bolt. They're all the same length on a Subaru except for the upper starter bolt. The bolt that holds the starter up on top is longer. That's the only one that's longer. The rest of them are the same length. This is the dog bone right here. And we're going to put a 14 box end on one side, and then a 14 socket on the other. And we're going to loosen that up, and we're going to take the bolt right out. What this does is this allows us to lift the transmission up. If you leave that bolt in there, the transmission is being held in place by this dog bone, and you have a really hard time lifting the engine out of the car. You're going to have to take this bolt out to put it back in, because you have to jack the transmission up to get the right angle. So I take it out now. It's just, you know, I don't like to struggle. Life already has enough struggles. So there's a bolt on the firewall here that we're also going to loosen up with the 14 millimeter socket. We're going to loosen it up, and then we're going to lift the dog bone up. We're going to lift it up out of the way, and then we're going to tighten the bolt back down. and that keeps the dog bone up out of our way. Sometimes the dog bone will hit right here, and it'll prevent the transmission from lifting. So we just get it up out of the way. Basically, we've accessed everything we can on the driver's side. The other two bolts we're going to get at from underneath. So we put a deep well socket on my long ratchet again, and we're going to take this upper bell bolt out. The upper bell bolt holds this bracket in place. It just holds a wiring harness for the computer. There's a bolt back there, and we're going to put this in right here, and we're going to loosen this up.
What size did you say that was?
That's a 12 millimeter or 14 millimeter. And we're going to loosen that up and take that bolt out. Okay. Another bolt out. Push the harness back up out of the way. And then I'm going to go to a 14 millimeter shallow socket to get the rest of them out. We got 3 more to go. We got 2 bolts and a nut on the bottom. That one wasn't so tight. That or those Wheaties are really working. I put a Subaru engine in a sandrail yesterday. That was quite a little project. I rebuilt an engine for a sandrail, and
yeah, that's the engine block video assembly was the one with the forged pistons and everything.
Exactly.
That was going into the sandrail, so you got that installed yesterday?
Yep, I went and I delivered it.
That wasn't filmed because that was done about an hour and a half away from here, right?
Yes, it was. It was done up in
Camp Verde.
Camp Verde, yep.
Camp Verde, Arizona.
Yep, but the car is going to be back here, and I'll let you know when it's back, Carrie.
Cool. We can film the car.
He's going to bring the car over here, and we're going to do a startup on it in about a week. And then he's going to take...
So when you put the engine in, it wasn't ready to be started. You just put the engine in place.
We put the engine in and hooked up about 75% of it, but he's got some
So it hasn't been turned on yet?
Nope,
So when the sandrail comes down here, we can actually film it being fired up the first time.
Exactly. He's got some turbo plumbing to do, and he's just got some electrical stuff. He's converting the computer system on it to a newer, more modern version. And so when he gets all that done, I'm going to wire the alternator. He's going to bring it here, and I'm going to put in a rebuilt power steering pump on it, and then wire the alternator for him.
What a guy. What a guy you are.
Well, then I get to see my engine start up.
Yeah.
I like that. That's fun. That's the most rewarding part of the whole deal, is starting that motor up and it purring like a kitten.
Got another bolt all the way back down towards the bottom.
It's a nut. It's a 14
it's just a nut.
Just a nut, 14 millimeter. Sometimes those are tight. Sometimes those are so tight you can't hardly loosen them up. But this one wasn't bad. I get a little stronger every time I work on one of these Subarus. This is a bracket that holds the O2 sensor cable from hitting the axle shaft. It just wraps around it. This one's kind of bent up pretty good, but we'll straighten it out and get it to work. And then this nut holds this bracket in place.
I see.
And then we just wrap this around the cable. I'll straighten this out and make it work. Otherwise, I've got better ones. We may replace it. So we're getting close to wanting to get the car lifted up and get underneath it. I'm going to take the power steering pump assembly and just kind of lift it up out of the way now. We're all done over there, so it sits up there real nice. That's a nice place to put it. 10 millimeter on a long extension. Just 2 bolts on this oil filler tube. And it just lifts right out.
I could have done that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take, there's four 14 millimeter bolts that hold this AC compressor in place. Sometimes they're very tight. These ones were.
Those don't have to be that tight, do they?
Well, I like them tight, but I don't. They need to be tight enough to secure it. Probably 40 foot-pounds. Sometimes they're just tight because they're corroded. They've been in there a long time. Some of them have Loctite from the factory on them. They eliminated a pressure switch.
So that's not the right air conditioning compressor for this car.
Well, you know, if you looked at the original one, it probably just had a plug there.
Interesting.
So they just cut the wires. But there's Loctite on this bolt. That red stuff right here, you can see it. I don't know why Subaru does that. It's usually just 1 out of the 4 has Loctite. They only put it on 1. That way, if the other 3 loosen up, that 1 will still hold it. I might have to have you loosen this one up, Carrie.
Wow, that was tight.
Yes, it was. Okay, let me grab some bungee cords. Get 2 bungee cords, one to hold it up and then one to hold it back out of the way. Ready to jack it up? See that little jack point carrier that I'm lifting it up on? Right dead center. It works great. Supports the car well. Wish my dad would have supported our family like that jack point does. Those are 3,000-pound jack stands. I have a good friend that died solely supporting a car from a jack. He was taking the drive shaft out of the car. He had the back end of it lifted up, had the back wheels off. It was taking the drive shaft out. When he popped the drive shaft loose, the car rolled and fell right on top of him and crushed him. Yeah, he was 34 years old. First thing we're gonna do is take the engine exhaust loose. And there's 6 bolts, 3 on each side. They usually come off fairly nice. That's because we live in Arizona. They're actually nuts. What's interesting, Carrie, is just about everything I've gotten in lately has been a Forester. Except for that sand rail, I've worked on all Foresters in the last 2 weeks. And I've got a couple more lined up besides this one. Unusual to see one without a drop of oil on the oil pan. Did you see that, Carrie? How dry that oil pan was?
Yeah, it is dry.
You don't see that too often.
Although it does appear up by the gasket around the oil filter. It's a little...
Yeah, and there's an oil cooler. We always replace that gasket to the oil cooler because it always leaks. They last about 2 or 3 years and then they start leaking. Okay, so we've got the exhaust loosened up. You pull it down from the motor. There's a nut behind the exhaust system. These are very tight. Sometimes they're hard. I've had to cut them off. I've had to take a torch and cut them off. Sometimes they just they're real tight and the nut strips, and the nut 14mm nut and a flat washer. I got one on this side. Okay. Now I'm going to put this little 2x4 underneath here to hold the exhaust down. If you look at this particular engine, we have these transmission lines that are supported by the engine. See this bolt right here? That's got to come off, and then there's another one. Remember the other one that was real hard to see? We'll take the one off that we can get at now, and then we'll struggle with the other one when the engine's hanging in the air. They only did this for like 2 years. They actually ended up moving these lines, and they brought them along the frame rail in the later years, so you didn't have to go through this to pull an engine. They actually relocated them very nicely in, I think, 2001. This was kind of a bad design right here. I'm also going to take this lower radiator hose off too while we're at it, since it has to come off anyway. Watch out, Carrie, there might be water running out of here. Yeah, a little bit. There we go. Sometimes these can be kind of a bugger to get off. I've had girlfriends like that. It's full of corrosion.
Wow.
It's all, you know, all gunked up. Look at all that on there.
Gross.
Other than this one bolt here, we've got 2 more to get to, and if you remember those, Carrie, those were kind of a bugger to tape. It's right next to the rack and pinion, and right above the axle shaft on the bell housing. There's 2 bolts that are right next to each. There's a bolt and a nut, and we have to get them both out. In the earlier cars, they didn't have this bolt. Up through 98, anything 98 and older did not have the bolt that I'm taking out right now. They started using an 8-bolt bell housing in 1999. Anything prior to that only had 4. They had 2 studs on the bottom and they had 2 bolts on top. So you wouldn't be taking this out if you're working on anything in 98 or older. I think it's loose enough where I can get it out by hand if I can get my arm up in there. Okay, got 1 bolt out. Now we're going to go after the nut. And to get that nut off, we use a swivel. We use a 14 millimeter on a swivel. I've actually known people to take this axle out to get at this nut, but I've usually been able to get it loose without having to go to that extreme. It is kind of a bugger to get at. I will admit that it's the hardest fastener to access on this installation job, and every once in a while I scrape or bust a knuckle trying to get it loose, but we're gonna see if it's a good day. Oh, it's not even tight. I've had these things so tight that I've broken sockets getting them loose. These swivel sockets, they don't like really tight bolts, but this one came loose. It's a good day. After we get this this one last bell attachment off, we're gonna drain the oil on it. They come from the factory with a washer behind this nut, and a lot of people don't put the flat washer back in place. I always do. I'll put one when we put this back in. I'll get a washer and we'll put one in there. I think if Subaru found a reason to put one in there, then we should find a reason to put one back in there. Other than draining the fluid out, the oil out of this, we're ready to pull it out. Okay, we're gonna drain the oil out of this now. I'm just gonna pull the oil drain plug out. 17 millimeter, takes a 17 millimeter socket to do that. And I'm gonna save this oil in a clean pan because we're gonna put it in Carrie's car.
Yeah. Okay.
Look at that oil, it's nice and clean.
It's like chocolate milk.
It's not even chunky.
What are you doing now?
I'm taking the oil filter loose. I'm not gonna spin it off yet, I'm just gonna get it loose. And then I'm gonna move the oil pan underneath it because Subarus always lose a bunch of oil when you take that filter off. So you don't want to take that too loose until you have a pan underneath it because they retain a lot of oil and it's going to come running out as soon as you screw that off. And the nice thing about a Subaru is you can actually catch the oil from both of them if you have a big enough pan. So I'm going to start loosening this now, and once the oil starts to drain, I'm going to make sure my pan is in a good spot, and I'm going to let some of it run out of the filter before I start turning it off any farther. Okay, so I'm going to spin it off the rest of the way now. I like to get most of the oil out of the engine before I pull it out, just because I'm going to be tearing this motor apart within the next week or so, and I'm going to rebuild it. I'm going to go through this motor and put in another Subaru. We're going to try and keep as many Subarus on the road as we can. It's one of the few cars that's really worth recycling. The cars hold up so darn well that, you know, if a guy does a decent job putting a motor together, you can keep them on the road for a long time. You don't see many of them in the junkyard, that's for sure. When you're hunting used parts, very hard to find used parts for Subaru. Okay, I've already got a old oil filter that I've already drained and it's nice and empty, and I'm going to screw it back on here now just so I don't have oil dripping from the oil cooler. Now this is a Forester, and Foresters, just like STIs and WRXs, they're outfitted with a oil cooler. And there's water that runs through that oil cooler that actually cools the oil. Engine coolant circulates through it, and it reduces the operating temperature of the oil. In fact, a lot of the sand rails I work on, they outfit them with this exact oil cooler. I'm going to just wipe that off. I'm going to screw this oil filter back on it. Like I say, this oil filter has already been emptied out. So I'm going to put the drain plug back in, and we're going to lift this motor out. Hour and a half, Carrie, we got this ready to pull out. See if we can get it in an hour and a half. Putting a lift chain on it. Doesn't have to be a real big lift chain. This engine only weighs 250 pounds.
Why don't you just pick it up?
Because I have to live with my back for the rest of my life.
Oh.
Believe it or not, on sand rails, these engines hang off the back of the transmission without any support. Now this cherry picker was also purchased at Harbor Freight. Probably 10 years ago, I think I paid $200 for it. So on this particular engine, I always put this little extra chain on. And what that does is it keeps the, I run a bolt to the front and it keeps the engine from tilting.
Ah, so it doesn't
do the kittywampus thing. So I get that to that position, and then I find a nice little, right about there.
What was that bolt hole used for? Was that the air conditioner?
The air conditioner was, and that keeps the engine from tilting back.
All right, so what do you have to do to release the engine now?
Well, I'm going to lift it up, and I still have that 10. If you remember that 10mm bolt that holds that transmission line in place.
Oh yeah.
I still have to take that out. If I forgot to do that, we'd be pulling transmission lines with the motor.
Ugh, that can't be good.
So I'm going to take that out quick, Carrie.
So you just jacked up the motor a little bit, and that's going to give you access to that 10mm bolt a little better.
Exactly. The bolt is right back here, up underneath the frame.
You know what?
Directly above the frame. Very hard to get to. Not the best thing Subaru did. There. Got the bolt out, the line's loose. Now we're going to pull this engine out. The engine's already starting to separate. If you look here, the bell housing is already developing a gap right here. I have this screwdriver ground to a point on the end. I did that because it's a snap-on, and it's a lot stronger than most screwdrivers. If I did this with any other kind of screwdriver, it would destroy it. So I just tap it in and I separate the engine and the tranny like that. I'm gonna go to the other side and do the same thing. Sometimes they don't come out this easy, and this side might be a little bit more of a challenge.
Why are they so stuck together like that if there's no gasket material?
Corrosion.
There's no fluid going between those 2 points, is there?
No, it's just corrosion. Just aluminum to aluminum corrosion.
Aluminum to aluminum with dirt and the oil and stuff.
See how easy that came out?
Yeah, I saw the transmission sort of break free there. Now the engine does appear to look like it's
pretty much
free of its binds. Now what do? You're just pulling it forward.
Yeah.
You don't want to pull too forward because you don't want to hit your radiator, right?
Right.
That radiator is very easily damaged.
All right. But I'm good at this. I've did this once before.
Yeah, have you?
You can see the 2 studs down there that are hitting the torque converter.
Oh, I thought you were referring to you and I.
Oh, well. Can you see how I'm holding I'm holding the engine forward so those studs don't drag the torque converter out of the transmission.
I see. So those studs right there are the ones you're holding forward so they don't
drag on the torque converter and pull the torque converter out of the transmission.
Gotcha.
If the torque converter comes out of the transmission, that can get ugly. We're going to take the flywheel off now and put it on the other engine. This is a DeWalt 3/4 inch electric impact.
Where are we going with this?
We're going to pull the 8 bell bolts out. Or the 8 flywheel bolts, I'm sorry.
What size socket are you using?
14 millimeter.
It's 10, 12, 14, or 17, right?
10, 12, 14, or 17.
Look at that,
Yes,
I'm learning.
sir. Not all computer guys are geeks.
Hey. I'm proud to be a geek.
If you look back here, there's minimal leakage back here. You can see there's just a tiny bit of seepage around the rear main seal. Subarus don't really leak a lot from the back side of the motor since they replaced this cover with an aluminum cover. And I know we talked a little bit about this, Carrie, and I'm going to show you something real quick before we get any farther into this. Up through 1998, they put a plastic cover back here. This one's actually made of phthalic material, which is like an ashtray material. It handles heat real well, but they do warp and they do leak. The aluminum cover was the best thing they did. If we would have pulled this engine apart and it would have had a plastic cover on, this would be covered in wet oil. It would look really ugly. You can barely see any seepage down here, and this is we're talking a 14-year-old car here. So the aluminum cover was a big
But
step.
you did say it had a transmission job done at some point.
Yeah, but they probably didn't do anything with the engine.
Okay.
It looks like it's never been touched back here.
Well, then 14 years, that's not bad at all.
No, it isn't. So we're going to take this engine now and we're going to set it up on an engine stand. Okay, I've always got the bolts and the nuts already ready on the stand waiting. So I only work on Subaru, so I never have to readjust them. So I just pull this out of the stand and I slide it over the 2 studs on the bottom. All Subarus have 2 studs down there. And some of the newer ones have 2 studs up on top also.
Oh.
I don't really like those. I like them when they just have the studs on the bottom. It's a little harder to pull the motor out and get it back in with the studs on top. But we work around that. I always use a washer because you can see it runs out of threads right there.
Yeah.
And they're all the same. So every single one it runs out of threads by the time you get to the engine stand. So I just I use a thick flat washer down there. I'm able to tighten it up then. And I do the same on both sides. Got the bracket on the engine stand. We're just going to slide this in. Kind of tip it forward. Where to put the pin? Oh, right here. Put the pin in. And then just set it down slowly. Subarus always, well, they'll leak out of there for quite some time. I sometimes throw a pan under there. Yep, that's it.